So the question is how well Dragon Age represents sort of the interplay between religion and politics, or how it deals with the interplay between religion and politics. And honestly, I think this is one of the places where Dragon Age is at its strongest, because it categorically refuses just to reduce religion to political power play. But it recognizes that politics, that power is always bound up in religious claims and in various ways, and really conflicting, complicated, intersecting ways. So let me just start by talking about the chantry, because I think this is pure genius. I think this is so good. Like I was saying a minute ago, Andrasteism is born out of a cult that arises around a Revolutionary War hero. Right? Andraste herself is a Revolutionary War hero. She is rebelling against the power of the Tevinter Imperium. This is an insurgent political movement that claims religious backing in its origins. Right? And they win. Ultimately, they win, right? And Andrasteism becomes the sort of cult of the empire itself in Orlais. And when they win, it turns out that even though this is a sort of radical insurgent political movement at its core, it turns out to be internally incredibly strict and oppressive in its own ways, in its own turn, right? Because the way that Andrasteism works is that they blame one of the central tenets of Andrasteism is that magic is bad, right? Magic is bad because it was the Tevinter mages who usurped the power of the gods, and in usurping the power of the gods brought the first blight into existence by using magic when they shouldn't have used magic, to overturn the natural order that the Maker had put into place, right? That's one of the central tenets of Andrasteism. That has a distinct political flavor, because that is said in opposition to the rulership of the Tevinter mages, right? It said, no, you guys are illegitimate political authorities because you are claiming this power, which is a dirty power. This is an oppressive power. The real God stands against your power, stands against the use of magic to claim control, ownership over other people. So there's this sort of radical political moment at the origins here. But once it's instituted, it becomes oppressive, internally oppressive in its own ways, in lots of different ways, especially the exclusion of magic users, or the sharp surveillance of magic users, but also even within its own sort of religious structure. So it's strictly reserved for women priests, for example. It's a cool little gender reversal that they're doing basically with the history of the Catholic Church. The chantry is organized in a very Catholic kind of way, but with a gender flip, which is what Dragon Age likes to do, and it's pretty clever and it's well done. So the men are formally excluded from the priestly classes, and instead just form a kind of sort of invisible army of support staff around the priesthood, the all-women priesthood. And yeah, so there's the sharp surveillance community over magic users, sharp exclusion, gender exclusion on in the priesthood itself, and so you can see how it becomes an oppressive sort of exclusionary force in its own right. Now, combine that with the fact that once Andrasteism becomes the official cult of the Orlesian Empire, the Tevinter Imperium also sort of adopts that same cult. They adopt Andrasteism, but they flip it precisely in order to neuter it politically. I think this is fascinating and brilliant. So the Tevinter Imperium, in their version of Andrasteism, their version of the chantry, for one thing, Andraste wasn't chosen by the Maker. She was just a really powerful mage. So she was actually herself a magic user, which starts to bring the possibility of more magic use back into the fold. They're much looser with the use of magic, and they're much more open, and they're open to male priests, for example. So formally, the Tevinter imperial version of the chantry is much more inclusive, open, and tolerant. But they are inclusive, open, and tolerant precisely in order to neuter the sort of political radicalism of Andrasteism at its core. And this is, I mean, this is genius, I think, because it's exactly how religions work all of the time. That there are these political insurgent moments. There are these power plays. There's something about power at the core of the movement that becomes threatening to imperial forces, that becomes threatening to these dominant political authorities, who then try to adopt or incorporate some of the key elements of these movements, but in a way that gets rid of the political radicalism. So now the Tevinter Imperium is able to say, hey, no, our chantry is real. We've got our divine. We've got our priests. Everything is represented here, except for our mages are able to stay in power. We're no longer going to take that threat to like the fundamental political structure of the Imperium seriously anymore. So like you have that whole political dynamic happening within Andrasteism itself. Fascinating stuff. Then you can see the way in which the politics of religion translates into some of these other traditions, especially the elves, because those are the other surface dwellers, right? And in the elves' case, what you have is an attempt to think about what religion and the recovery of religion looks like among subjugated populations. And religious studies scholars have done a lot of thinking about this over the past 30, 40 years especially. Thinking about how religious communities try to reclaim parts of their past that have been forcibly, deliberately erased by colonial powers. So you have a lot of thinking about this in sort of like reclaiming African religions, for example, most of the sources of which have been erased. They were largely oral traditions to begin with, just like the Elven traditions were. What did exist was mostly built into architecture, into artwork, into tools, into community practices, which were deliberately destroyed by their subjugators. So most of those sources, since they're not text-based as they are in the sort of imperial cultures, most of those sources are gone, are just outside of, we don't have access to them anymore. So what the people in those communities have to start doing is rebuilding their own religious imagination on the basis of what little they can remember, the oral sources still available to them, the sort of bits of collective memory that they still have access to. But now they have to start recreating that in conversation with the religious traditions of the empire, with the subjugating classes. So you end up with this interesting little syncretism that's partial reclamations of the old religion in combination with the religion of the empire, but twisted a little bit, twisted on its head. So one of the things, for example, to move into like real life, to see the sort of analogies here, one of the things that you get is a lot of people over the past several decades have been trying to rebuild Yoruba religion. This is a sort of southwestern Nigerian religious tradition that migrated to the Americas on slave ships, mainly. And became incredibly important cultural forces in Brazil, in Cuba, across the Mediterranean. Brazil and Cuba are still the sort of main strongholds here. Candomblé down in Brazil is the name of the sort of contemporary version. Santeria in Cuba. These are Yoruba-inspired traditions. But a lot of the original Yoruban sources are gone, or just completely gone. We have no access to them anymore. They were completely obliterated, and very deliberately so, by the slave traders. And in this case, one of the things that you see happening in these Yoruba-inspired traditions is the key figures in Yoruba religion are the Orishas, these sort of spiritual beings, these gods who sort of live in this sort of spiritual world, take messages between human beings and the spiritual world. But a lot of the stories about these Orishas have been erased. A lot of the powers have been forgotten. Even their names have been forgotten. So there's the sort of pantheons of Orishas, the collections of Orishas that exist, differ tremendously now from place to place to place, from community to community to community, all of which have some ties back to sort of ancient or classical Yoruban religion, but in different ways. But what you see Yoruba-inspired religious folks doing in the New World is starting to combine this with stories about Catholic saints. So now you have you have a particular Orisha being identified with a particular saint, and claims that really when the Catholics are talking about that saint, they're talking about this Orisha, or when I'm talking about this Orisha, I'm talking about that saint, which provides them with a couple of things. It provides them with a backstory that had been erased, right? It sort of fills out the mythology of the tradition for them that they had lost access to. It also provides a sort of subterraneous language for being able to speak about their own religious tradition under conditions of oppression, when otherwise they would have been they would have been killed or persecuted for continuing to practice these traditions. They can say, oh, no, 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 I'm just talking about St. Thomas. Oh, no, 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 I'm just talking about Mary. When, like, these are now the names for these Orishas. So there's this syncretism that serves multiple purposes, and I think you really actually see that happening. This is the genius of the portrayal of Elven religious traditions in Dragon Age. You see this syncretism that serves a dual purpose of filling in lost histories, and also giving the elves a way to speak about their own religious traditions in a way that's sort of non-threatening to the Empire and lets them continue to practice under the surface. So you can see, all of these different sort of political dimensions, these different power dimensions that are integral to the sort of religious identities and the development of these religious traditions in the universe of Dragon Age.